As soon as I stepped into my high school, I suddenly felt like an adult. I somehow believed that now I could make my own decisions, and my parents had nothing to do with my private life. Before I start my story, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to this channel for more interesting stories yet to come. Every kid around me was going on adventures, smoking things, and being irresponsible. I did not have anything in common with them, because I was way more advanced and mature. I would sit in the front of the class and listen to my teachers carefully because I wanted to study. Education would help me grow up faster and become more independent. However, I should confess that sometimes sitting in the front was more fun because of other things. To be more exact, from this desk I could stare at my English teacher's body and see her beautiful glowing skin more clearly. From here, her sparkling voice would wave into my ears loudly, and the sound of her heels would vibrate floor under me. Yes, you got it right. I loved her. Mrs. H was my first and true love. Once we had another quiz about Shakespeare creations. I had my head down, staring at my piece of paper, but Mrs. H's perfume smell wrapped around my head and hypnotized me. I shyly looked up, wanting to see what she was doing, and to my surprise, she looked back and smiled. It was a moment of special joy that I have never felt before. Mrs. H would always smile at everyone because she was a charming and friendly person. But the smile she gifted me was different. It shone up the whole room. I even felt like Mrs. H shadowed the sun with her beauty. At that moment, I knew that my dream was not as far as I thought it would be. After we all turned in our quiz papers, Mrs. H called me. "Thomas, please stay for a while. I want to discuss last week's essay with you," she said. My heart started banging. Everything around suddenly got dark and quiet. I could only see Mrs. H's daring blue eyes staring at me, and could only hear my heart that was about to jump out from my chest. "Was there a problem, Mrs. H?" I asked with a shaky voice. "Yes, there is a big problem that I want you to fix," Mrs. H answered and stepped closer to me. At that point, everyone left the classroom. There was only me and Mrs. H. I thought to myself, what kind of problem is she talking about? Or maybe she is just teasing me. Mrs. H leaned over her desk, acting like she was looking for my paper. Her dress slowly raised. You could imagine what happened to me when I saw her beautiful curves like this. This was a clear signal. Mrs. H wanted me to share my love with her. It was already afternoon when I got home. I had a huge smile stuck on my face. My head was in the clouds. And instead of walking, I danced around. "Where have you been? I called in school and they said your last class ended an hour ago." My mom screamed as soon as I stepped inside. I was so happy that even her screaming sounded like a beautiful melody. For sure, I was not going to say why I was late. I realized that nobody must have known about what happened between Mrs. H and me. It was a strict violation of rules, and especially for my parents. My parents were very conservative people. I knew what happened between Mrs. H and I would drive my parents crazy. I did not even want to imagine what could happen if my parents found out about my affair. I decided to keep everything a secret, even from my closest friends. Weeks went by. Mrs. H and I did not plan on stopping our affair. Every Wednesday, she would ask me to stay after the class to discuss something. Nobody doubted anything. It was like a dream come true. My love for Mrs. H was growing day by day. I did not care about anything but spending a couple of hours with her. Unfortunately, we could not go on dates or walk in the park because she had a husband and I had strict parents. Sometimes I would worry that Mrs. H would one day state that she wanted to stop all this. What would I do if she broke up with me? I had no idea. One day when I got back home from my weekly session with Mrs. H, I saw my parents sitting on the couch, looking angry. Oh my God, what is going on? Did they know? I thought to myself. My knees started trembling. "Thomas, sit down. We need to talk." My mother pointed at the armchair. I slowly took a seat. I could not even look them in the eyes. There was a moment of silence, but it felt like a century. I had to understand what they knew and how they knew it. "Your school has cooled us," My dad started talking. They know! This thought started screaming in my head again. They said your grades got worse. Can you explain how this happened? Dad continued. And I suddenly smiled. This must have looked creepy for my parents, but the best part was that they had no idea about my affair. I am feeling a little bit stressed. We should do something about it. Mom immediately sympathized with me. Maybe we should take you to the therapist. Therapist? Mrs. H can help me. My therapist! I shouted and jumped up. She is a certified therapist, and some of my classmates are already her patients. My parents looked over each other. The truth was they both liked Mrs. H as my teacher, so they quickly decided that Mrs. H would be a good therapist as well. I started visiting Mrs. H at home. She had her office at home, so her husband was always around, but that did not keep us from doing what we wanted the most. Our affair continued quickly. We had more time and more privacy in her office. Until one day, the most beautiful and the most cursed sentence uncontrollably jumped from my mouth. I love you, I said on one of our therapy sessions. Mrs. H looked at me, surprised and terrified. Her eyes reddened, and her tender shoulders started trembling. You can't say that. I have a husband. Mrs. H pushed me further away from her. But we have been doing this for 4 months now. I tried to get closer and hug her, but Mrs. H did not look me in the eyes. She threw my clothes to me and strictly asked me to leave. I was in total despair. I walked out and saw Mrs. H's husband cooking in the kitchen. Oh, are you leaving already, Thomas? I wondered if you could stay over for dinner. I looked at his calm face with disgust, and suddenly, anger burst into my body. I knuckled my fists, and my whole face got red. Are you okay? Mr. H asked and started walking towards me. I hated him so much because he was a barrier between me and the love of my life. I wanted to beat him, wanted to say the truth out loud, but instead, some things and emotions got mixed up in my body, and I suddenly threw up all over the floor. A small gagging noise was heard before puke's sour scent added the delicious aroma of cooked dinner. Mr. and Mrs. H called my parents and told them to come and get me. I felt strengthless. My eyelids were so heavy that I could not keep them open anymore. My brain was on a 5% battery. My parents rushed to Mrs. and Mr. H's home. What happened? My mom ran to me and held my hand. Are you okay? Dad asked as he poured cold water over my face. Was I okay? Of course not. I was in love, and it was killing me. I looked up and gazed at Mrs. H, who was staring at me with her eyes wide open. She was biting on her nails. There were guilt and dread coming out of her look. That moment, I had all powers. The power of ruining her career, ruining her marriage and her name. And, to my surprise, I wanted that. Back then, I thought that she deserved the worst of all. Mom, I said out loud, without removing my eyes from Mrs. H. Yes, honey. Mrs. H and I had an affair. My brain stuttered for a moment. I knew that officially this was the end of my first relationship with the love of my life. Mrs. H was utterly shocked, as everyone else in the room. My parents stood frozen, staring at the woman who had deprived their religious, angel son. This moment of silence was broken by Mr. H, who shouted, I thought you were doing that with your students. These words made the room spin around me all over again. What? I asked loudly. Others too? Mrs. H could not handle it anymore. She fell on the floor and started crying like a baby. But I did not care anymore. This woman was a psycho, and she deserved every bit of this hate and anger. The next day my parents went to the school and asked for firing Mrs. H. After a week, everybody knew about the story. Mrs. H would come to school with her head down. Her beauty almost instantly disappeared. Her skin did not glow anymore. Her hair did not shine, nor her smile or eyes sparkled anymore. For sure, I felt pity for her, As my anger slowly disappeared, I did not know if I hated or loved her. The school was still discussing if they should have fired Mrs. H. They even did an investigation in the school. The police talked to every kid who might have been Mrs. H's part of the affair in the past. I knew that if I told the truth, they would fire Mrs. H. If I lied, others would still say to the fact, so my word would not do anything good for Mrs. H. That's when I decided that I did not want Mrs. H gone, and I had a new plan. I gathered around every kid who was Mrs. H's lover. I set them down in a circle and stood in the center. "We all let Mrs. H play us, right?" I asked loudly. The 4 boys nodded their heads. "But we all love Mrs. H, right?" "We do," they still agreed. "Then we should protect her and keep her around. It is not her fault that her husband is a dumb, stupid man who cannot love her as much as we do." Believe it or not, everybody agreed. We decided to cover for Mrs. H and never tell the truth to any policeman ever. Unfortunately, Mrs. H still had to go because her reputation was already ruined. Yet, she was never charged with anything, and she never went to prison. Now I am here, in my vast corporate. Years went by after that incident, and I see Mrs. H sitting in the lobby. Maybe she's here for the Ryer vacancy that we posted a couple of days ago. What should I do? I think to myself. Even after these years, she still looks gorgeous, but there is one minor change in her appearance. I look down at her hands and notice that she is not wearing a wedding ring anymore. I fix my tie and confidently walk outside. I approach her. She looks surprised. She instantly knew who I was. "Miss, there is a big problem that I want you to fix," I say and smile at her. She smiles back and shines up the whole room.